chapter 8. We'll look at a couple of people that stood out from the crowd. We're going to talk about standing out from the crowd this morning. I'll pray before we begin. Lord, I thank you for your word. Thank you for your goodness, your kindness. Lord, I just ask that we'll all hear your word and receive your word by faith, and I just ask that you'll help me to preach your word this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Luke 8, beginning in verse 40, it says, "And as Jesus was returning, the people welcomed him, for they had all been waiting for him. And a man named Jairus came, and he was an official of the synagogue, and he fell at Jesus' feet and began urging him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. And a woman who had suffered a chronic flow of blood for 12 years could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. And Jesus said, 'Who is the one who touched me?' And while they were all denying it, Peter said, 'Master, the people are crowding and pressing in on you.' But Jesus said, 'Someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had left my body.' Now when the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and admitted in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace.'" So we begin in verse 40 where it says that Jesus returned and the crowd welcomed him and had been waiting for him. The crowds were ready to receive Jesus with joy. They were happy for Jesus to receive him back, and they were expecting for Jesus to show up. They were waiting for him. They were expecting him. And there was a crowd around Jesus, and they welcomed him, and they received him, and they were happy to have him. And there are crowds around Jesus all the way today. There are multitudes of people that have received him into their lives. They have placed their faith in what he did on the cross 2,000 years ago. They have recognized that he stood in their place, and they have asked him to forgive them, to wash them clean, and they have received him, and they are saved. And there are crowds of people in churches today, many of whom have received Jesus. So there always have been crowds around Jesus, and there always will be crowds around Jesus. All from 2,000 years ago, all throughout history, all the way up to today, there's always been crowds around Jesus. But there have always been people that have, spiritually speaking, they stand out from the crowd. There have always been people from when Jesus walked this earth, all through history, all the way to today, that they stand out from the crowds because they know, they realize that they desperately need him, and they stand out because of their faith in him. Their faith is noteworthy enough that Jesus picks them out from a crowd, so to say. That's these two people here. There was a big crowd, but these two people, they were noteworthy enough that Jesus individually singled them out. And Jesus still does that today. He does it in our day-to-day lives, not just in here. He does it in day-to-day lives with people where people are singled out. And of course, even in church services where crowds gather, there's a crowd in here where people gather. People still stand out of the crowd because of their faith. In verse 41, he said that a man named Jairus came, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet, and he began urging him to come to his house. Jairus was, as it just said, an official of the synagogue. Officials of the synagogues, they were in charge of the synagogue services, and they were responsible for cleaning and maintaining the building. So you could say socially that Jairus was an important man. Many in the crowd probably knew him and many respected him. He was seen as a leader. He was seen as a man of authority. And with the crowds all around him, with Pharisees and whoever else religious people, leaders were around, with everyone watching, he fell down at the feet of Jesus. He humbled himself and he fell down at the feet of Jesus, face first, whole body prostrate. And the feet of Jesus is the best place that you can be when somebody can humble themselves and get at the feet of Jesus. See, this man, Jairus, he was a religious leader of the day. The religious leaders of that day, they knew the Old Covenant frontwards, backwards. Most of them could quote from memory the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible for certain, and even the whole Old Covenant. They knew it. They spent their whole lives, day in, day out, studying it. And he was, at this moment, he was acknowledging that Jesus Christ is exactly who he said he is, that he was the Messiah. Jesus, it wasn't a secret. Wherever he went, he put that in people's faces, that he was saying he was the Messiah, that I am the Son of God. And as you and I know, most of the religious leaders of that day rejected that, but not this man. He knew who Jesus proclaimed himself to be, and he fell down at the feet of Jesus, paying homage, showing Jesus, giving Jesus respect, and acknowledging Jesus as the Son of God. He knew who Jesus was, and he knew that he needed Jesus. And he began to beg Jesus to come to his house because he had an only daughter that was only 12 years old, and she was dying. And he got the attention of Jesus. It says that, and Jesus decided to go to see his daughter as he had requested. And it says that the crowds at this time were pressing against Jesus. The crowds were pressing against him so that that literally means like they were squeezing against him, just from all sides, pressing up against him. It wasn't just kind of barely bumping into him. I mean, it was just like if you ever seen only way I can think to explain it maybe is like a rock concert, the mosque where people are just pushing, acting all like lunatics. This is basically the picture. What you have here is Jesus in the middle of the crowds and everyone just pressing against him, the force of the crowd trying to get to him. So you know they all had needs. The majority of them were coming to him. They were all wanting something out of Jesus. And some may have just wanted to talk to him. They just wanted some time. They didn't really have any need to ask of him, but they were wanting his attention. But up to this point, the only person that had gotten his complete attention was Jairus. That was the person that really got his complete attention. And it was for no other reason than the posture of Jairus' heart. He didn't just want to see Jesus perform a miracle for his amusement. He had acknowledged that Jesus was the Son of God. He had fell down. He had worshiped him. He didn't just need Jesus to do some small thing for him. He was desperate for Jesus. If your daughter was dying, you would be desperate for Jesus to move. But there was a lot of people in the crowds that day that desperately needed something out of Jesus. I'm sure of it. Most everyone has needs. Everyone needs something out of Jesus. And I just have to stop and say this morning that this message is not about how to manipulate God into healing you. This message is not about having enough faith to make God do something. This message is about what the posture of your heart before God should be. That's what this is about, what our posture before him should be. And this man, Jairus, who was very important socially, he was very important religiously, he humbled himself and he prostrated himself at the feet of Jesus. He didn't care what other people thought. He didn't care what the Pharisee, what his religious peers thought. He stood out from the crowds. He was desperate for Jesus. He wanted to worship Jesus. His faith in the Son of God caused his story to be penned, and he was not just another face in the crowd that day. Big crowd. No one else was mentioned at this point but Jairus. Why? Because of the posture of his heart towards Jesus. And we have to, just like Jairus, not care what other people think about us, what other people think about how we go after Jesus. We just need to be desperate for Jesus. Not just desperate for him to touch my circumstance, but simply desperate for him to be in my life, desperate for his communion, desperate for his presence, desperate for his lordship over my life. There are crowds of people in churches this morning, and I would venture to say that there are only a small handful that would stand out from the crowd spiritually. They're all around Jesus. They want to be around Jesus. The crowds here wanted to be around Jesus, but only one man had stood out. There are crowds. Every church, there are crowds, and there's someone in that crowd looking at one person somewhere that's shouting in worship. They're just so thankful for their God. It's not coming from a showboating place. They're just worshiping God, and somebody's watching that and saying, that's so unnecessary. Why do they do that? It makes me feel uncomfortable. Well, it's like, well, sorry, they love the Lord more than you. And I'm not saying because somebody, I'm talking about the person with that heart posture that will, I'm not talking because you don't worship like them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you or whoever looks at someone like that, don't get upset because they are simply demonstrating their love for Jesus. And you're cold towards him. That's what that is a lot of the times. But that person standing out, the heaven sees their heart, heaven sees their faith, Jesus sees it, they stand out to him. While the person looking at them annoyed, heaven just pays them no mind. Yeah, heaven sees their heart, sees that sin in their heart, but they're not getting the attention, they're not standing out of the crowd to Jesus like what we're talking about this morning. There's going to be somebody somewhere this morning across America, at least one person, probably more, that's not going to want to leave the altar this morning. They're just wanting to stay in the altar, stay in his presence, weeping before him, and heaven sees it while heaven pays no mind to everyone else that's just ready to go home and sit in their recliner. The people are saved. The majority of the people I'm talking about are saved. It's what I'm talking about. They're saved people, but they're not standing out from the crowd. They're just coming, being a part of their service this morning, but they're not really wanting to touch Jesus. And it's not about doing something to get God's attention. These examples I've just given, they're just examples. It's the heart that God sees. A person can shout to their lungs almost explode in a church service, but if it's not coming from the place of their heart, really just worshiping and desiring Jesus, that's nothing. I'm talking about the posture of a person's heart. You can't manufacture that before God. You can't sing loud enough. You can't raise your hands loud enough. You can't weep hard enough. God sees the heart is what he is looking at. People were doing all kinds of things that day to get Jesus' attention. But at that point, only Jairus stood out to Jesus. Other people were pressing into him, doing all kinds of things to get his attention, but Jairus was the man that stood out to Jesus. You can't manufacture God's presence in your church house or in your life. You can't work it up. He sees hearts. He sees the silent whimper from a child of his, and he sees the shout when it comes from the heart of faith. Faith is what gets his attention. It's always, all throughout the Gospels, when Jesus singled people out from the crowds, it was their faith that got his attention. Verse 43, he says, in a woman who had suffered a chronic flow of blood for 12 years, she could not be healed by anyone. Now there's this woman that also stood out, that's going to stand out from the crowd. Some random woman, we don't even have her name. Jairus was important enough that they knew his name, and his name was penned, but this woman was so seemingly unimportant, we don't even know her name. In most of the crowd, some I'm sure knew of her, some might have knew her personally, but not many. She was relatively unknown. She wasn't socially important. She didn't stand out in the crowd again as far as her importance or anything special about her. She was just a regular, common person. She had an issue of blood. She had a hemorrhage for 12 years, and no one could heal her, the Bible says. We have this important man socially that came to Jesus, and Jesus responded to his faith. And we have an unimportant woman socially that came to Jesus, and we are going to see that Jesus responded to her faith as well. We have a man, we have a woman. Jesus is not looking for your social status. He is not looking to see if you're male or female. He is looking for faith. He responds to faith. He don't respond to who you are. He responds to faith. And he is ready to touch the person that wants to receive him by faith. Verse 44, it says that she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. See, where the contrast of these two, where Jairus, he came in the open. He did not care who saw him. He didn't care what anybody thought. He prostrated himself before Jesus, humbled himself. This woman had her plan was to sneak through the crowd, touch Jesus, and then just sneak back away unnoticed. Just go back. She believed that she would be healed if she could just touch him. And she was going to sneak in, touch him, and leave. Now she had reasons for this, however. It was not out of pride or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to contrast between her and Jairus. That was not the case. It was not her pride that she was hiding. But according to the law, she was unclean because of her issue of blood. And anyone that she would touch would be made unclean. She was not allowed to touch anyone because, according to the law, she would be made unclean. So this woman risked a lot doing what she did. She could have gotten in trouble with the religious leaders because she was going through the crowd. She was bumping into people. She touched Jesus. According to the law, she made him unclean. So it was a risk for her. She was probably afraid to approach Jesus because she was unclean. Maybe she didn't know how Jesus would react. The details are speculation. This is all speculation. We don't really know exactly. But maybe she knew who Jesus was and that he was the Messiah, and she believed that he would allow her to approach him, but she was afraid of the crowds. Regardless, what we do know, whatever the reason exactly as to why she was scared, we do know that she had faith and that she was desperate for Jesus. And she was desperate enough to do what she had to do to get to Jesus. She was desperate enough to do what she had to do to press through the crowds and get to Jesus. Do not allow the crowds to stop you from getting to Jesus. Don't let anyone tell you how close you should be, how close you shouldn't be to Jesus. Don't pay attention to how close someone else is to Jesus, how close they're not to Jesus. You just get to Jesus. See, there are many people hanging around Jesus today. Again, like I said earlier, there's many people. Many people are saved. They have welcomed him. They have received him. They have saving faith. But there are few that have a faith that stands out because they are desperate for his touch. There were many people that got in this woman's way as she was trying to get to Jesus, but she pressed on. She didn't let it deter her, that she pressed on. And there are people all the way to this day that are around Jesus that would spiritually get in your way of Jesus, but you press on after him. Don't let someone's ignorant thoughts of how things should be. Don't let their ignorant thoughts about how worship should be. Don't let how much they think you should pray, how much you think it's not necessary to pray, get in the way of getting to Jesus. There's a lot of people in the crowds today that they're saved, they're sincere, but they don't have a fire under them that we should have under us. Don't let the crowds keep you from Jesus. Don't let people tell you that your lost loved one is too far gone to be saved. People will make little comments about somebody, how they're just can't see them ever. Don't listen to that. Don't let people tell you that your sickness is too serious for Jesus to touch you. You press on to Jesus. It is not about trying to bend the will of Jesus. It is simply about getting closer to Jesus because you want to be close to him. You need him in your life. It is the heart posture that we should have. That even Jesus, if you do not move in the way that I just want to be near you. I want to be in your presence. I want to know you more than I knew you yesterday. Even if you don't move in the way I expect you to move, I just want to be near you. But the thing about Jesus is that he often exceeds expectations. This woman expected to be healed. She had faith. She expected to be healed, and she touched his cloak, and she was healed. Her expectations was met. But however, we see that Jesus, in the following verses, would not let this woman simply get a healing and then just go on with her life in silence. Go back to her normal life that she had before, where she'd have been clean, but no one would have known, or maybe no one would have believed her. Jesus goes on in verse 45. He says, after she had touched him, her bleeding stops. He said, "Who is the one who touched me?" And while they were all denying it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing in on you." Jesus, after he's touched, he wants to know who touched me. Peter tells Jesus, the crowds are all crowding in on you and pressing in on you, Jesus. He's probably, I don't know exactly how Peter was. Maybe it was just maybe it wasn't so much arrogance out of Peter, like, well, yeah, Jesus, they're pressing in. Maybe it was just him questioning, trying to get a better grasp. But Peter's just like, well, yeah, Jesus, the crowds, they're pressing in on you. What are you getting at? But Jesus wants to know who touched him. He says, somebody touched me, and it was different. And the crowds all began denying it. There were people that were touching him. They were lying. They knew that they had bumped into him and pushed into him, and then they're all, no, we didn't do it. See, the interesting thing about people is that people want to be around Jesus, but few want to be accused of touching him. The majority do not want to get close enough to him that he notices them. The majority do not really seem to want to get Jesus' attention. They want to be around Jesus, but not involved with Jesus. They want to be around church, but they don't want anything required out of them. They want to be in church. They do want to be here, but they don't want to sing. They don't want to lift hands. They don't want to feel any kind of emotion. They just want to fulfill a religious duty and go home. But Jesus is saying, someone touched me. Someone has faith that stands out from the rest of the crowd. Jesus says, someone has touched me. In verse 46, he says, after Peter had said, they're pressing in on you, Jesus said, someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had left me. See, Jesus was well aware of what was going on. He wasn't oblivious to who it was or He knew what was going on. Jesus knew someone with faith had touched him, and he responded to that person by healing that woman. He knew exactly what had happened. The thing was, Jesus was not just interested in just healing this woman. He was not just interested, again, in her getting her healing and her going on her merry way with her life. He did not want to just heal her and leave her healed, yet no one know that she had been healed. For one thing, he wanted that to be public, that everyone would know that she has been made clean. He did not want this woman to live out the rest of her days as if she was unclean, even though she had now been made clean. And most of all, he did not want this woman to be healed without fully encountering him. She had not fully encountered Jesus. She had experienced his touch, but she had not fully encountered him. He doesn't just want to touch you and heal you. He wants to know you. He wants to have visitation with you. He wants to encounter you. He wants you to encounter him, and he wants you to know him. He wants a relationship with people. He wants a relationship with you. Not because he is up there lonely. He's not lonely. He has angels and people all around his throne worshiping him. He is not wanting relationship out of you because he's lonely. He wants relationship with you because he loves you. And when you love someone, you want relationship with them. He wants relationship with the whole world. It's why he came, he died, and he resurrected. He wants relationship, but the sad thing is the majority reject him on that invitation. He wants relationship with you because he loves you. He loved this woman. He was not going to let this woman slip away without spending time with her, without an encounter, without a back and forth conversation. He was not going to let this woman slip away without proclaiming publicly that she had been healed. Now when the woman, verse 47, now when the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and admitted in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had immediately been healed. So once the woman knew that Jesus knew who she was, that she knew he knew who he was, she knew her cover was blown, however you want to say it, she came forward, and just like Jairus, she fell at his feet. She was acknowledging his lordship, that he was the Messiah. Only she was trembling out of fear. She was afraid of there being consequences to what she had done. So again, she was not supposed to do what she had done. She was not supposed to be pressing through that crowd. She was not supposed to be bumping into people. She was not supposed to be touching Jesus, according to the law of that day. After Jesus called her out, she explained in front of everyone why she had touched him, and that she told him that I've been made whole, I've been healed. And everything Jesus did in the Gospels, it was public. If you need a touch from Jesus, you won't care who saw you. But see, this woman, again, I am not trying to blast her on that. She was not hiding out of pride. She was hiding because by the law, she was not supposed to touch anyone. She could have gotten in trouble. But Jairus, he did not care about what people thought. And all through the Gospels, anyone that came to Jesus in faith, when they really needed him, when they really wanted him in their lives, they did not care who was watching. So we can be so prideful as to what people think and prideful about ourselves. We don't want anyone knowing that we're hurting. We don't want anyone knowing that we're discouraged. We don't want anyone knowing that we have sin in our lives. But when you really get desperate for Jesus and you really want to be made whole, you don't care who's watching. It's why I do not like the raise your hand, everyone head bowed, eyes closed, raise your hand when we say this prayer, because everything Jesus did was public. And when a person really wants Jesus in their life and they really want to come to him and acknowledge him as Savior, they don't care that the preacher wants them to walk forward. You're going to come to Jesus. When you need a touch from Jesus, you're going to put away your pride. See, I will sympathize with someone that is insecure, that don't like being seen, because I was that person, but I can be honest with you too, some of that was pride. I got put on this front like I'm strong, like I'm a strong person. I don't want anyone to see me down there crying. Some of it was insecurity, but a good bit of it was pride as well. But when I really got desperate for Jesus in my life, I began to not care about that stuff no more. Everything Jesus did was public. Every encounter he had with people was public, and the people that were coming to Jesus with faith, it did not matter who was watching. They didn't care. When you really need him, and when you are really ready to put your faith in him, it does not matter who is around. It does not matter who is watching. Do not let the crowds stop you from going after Jesus. Do not let the crowds stop you from getting touched by Jesus. Who cares what people think? We're all going to stand before Jesus alone. When I'm standing before Jesus, I am not going to be concerned with what anyone is thinking but him at that moment. It's going to be crystal clear then. We're going to see so clearly when we get there. We're going to say, my goodness, the stuff I was concerned with before, and people, worried about people's opinions, and now all that matters is what he has to say to me. Don't let the crowd stop you from going after Jesus. There were a lot of people around Jesus that day and pressing against Jesus in that moment. All of them was wanting a little bit of Jesus, but only 2 people that day were touched by Jesus. A lot of people were touching him, but only 2 were touched by him because their faith stood out from the crowd. In verse 48, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Jesus, he proclaimed in front of everyone this woman had been made well. He was proclaiming, he was saying what she had just said is true. She did touch me. Her bleeding has stopped. This woman is now clean. He wasn't going to let her slip away. He wanted it to be known that he had touched this woman and that she had been healed. And more than that, he wanted her to know and everyone else to know that she had been healed spiritually. See, when you study that phrase, your faith has made you well, when you study it in the original tongue, in the Greek of that day, it not only means a physical healing, but it also means a spiritual healing. That phrase that Jesus said, and everyone knew that he wasn't just talking about her physical, that she had been spiritually healed. And the spiritual healing is what we need more out of Jesus than anything. See, I can be healed of my disease and go right off to hell at the end of my days. Or maybe I can not be healed while I walk this earth and believe God for my healing, never receive it, but I be healed when I get to heaven because my faith as this daughter, my faith has made me well. Because Jesus healed me, healed you, whoever, healed them spiritually while they walk this earth. Because I put my faith in the gospel, I put my faith in Jesus Christ, I came to him. See, he's dealt with the sin problem, but he's already died for every sin in this world that has ever been committed, ever will be committed. But the thing is, the person has to come to him, they have to put their faith in him, say, I know you are the Son of God, you stood in my place, I'm acknowledging that I deserve to die the death, that I could not live the perfect life that you did. I'm asking for you to wash me clean. And that's how a person is made spiritually whole. See, we know nothing of this woman's life, what kind of life she lived, other than what we do know is that she sins just like everyone else sins. She hadn't turned after putting her faith in Jesus that day. She hadn't turned. She didn't prove that she had faith in Jesus. She hadn't done one good deed yet. She done nothing. All she had done is put faith in Jesus and touched his cloak and came forward. When she could have stayed hiding, but she did. She came forward when he said, "Who touched me?" She put her faith in Jesus. All she had done at this point is she touched him, went and hid from him. But Jesus saw her faith in him, and she proclaimed, "Daughter, you have been healed physically and spiritually." See, her and Jairus, if we were not going to, but if we were to go on and read, we would discover that Jesus heals Jairus' daughter as well. This woman and Jairus were the only two that stood out from the crowd that day. And they both got way more than they expected out of Jesus that day. He exceeded their expectation. They came to him expecting, they came to him with faith, and he went above and beyond what they were expecting out of him. We're not going to continue reading, but while Jesus was on his way to see Jairus' daughter, someone came, met him on the way, and told him that Jairus, your daughter has died. She has passed. Don't bother Jesus anymore. He's an important man. He's got other things to do. Leave the teacher alone. But Jesus was not bothered. He told Jairus, he said, "Only believe, Jairus. Just keep believing." He didn't tell her he didn't tell Jairus, "I'm going to raise your daughter." He said, "Jairus, only believe." And Jesus went to his house, and Jairus obviously believed. Because when Jesus got there, he went to Jairus' home and he rose Jairus' daughter from the dead. The woman came to Jesus. She expected to be healed, but she got more than she expected as Jesus made it known to the crowds that she had been made well physically and spiritually. Her sins had been forgiven because of her faith in Jesus. And everyone from that day forward knew that she was not unclean. She could now touch her loved ones. She could touch her friends. She could embrace people. She could hug people again. She just wanted the bleeding to stop. And she was going to go on about her life and maybe have to go on living like she was unclean without touching her loved ones and so forth. But again, Jesus exceeded her expectations. He made her whole. He forgave her sins. And he let everyone know that she was a normal, clean person now. In closing, as we don't be like the crowds, all pressing around Jesus but not really getting his attention. There's many today like that crowd that they have welcomed Jesus, they have received him into their lives, they do love him, but they don't really stand out from the crowd. Be someone that your faith makes you stand out from the crowd, that your faith is different from everyone else's. Be someone that is determined to get close to Jesus and to keep getting closer to Jesus, even when other people think you're the weirdo, when in fact they're weird. The churches today the majority are not normal. When you look at it biblically, there should be more desire, there should be more hunger, there should be more gratitude for Jesus, there should be more praise for Jesus. We're the abnormal ones. Be someone that does not care what the crowd has to say or think about you or how over the top they think you might be and so forth. Everybody's got opinions. Who cares? See, Jesus responds to faith. He don't respond to social status. He'll respond to you if you're an important person. He'll respond to you if you're an unimportant person. He'll respond to you if you're anywhere in the middle, if you have faith in him. He responds to the person that desperately wants him. And we know so much more today than the crowds did 2,000 years ago. Those people, to an extent, they had an excuse. Yes, they had Jesus in the flesh, but they did not have the full revelation of everything we have today. We know so much more than those crowds did 2,000 years ago. So don't just press into Jesus because you want something out of him. Yes, you can come to him if you want something. He wants you to come to him if you want something. But don't let that be your lone. The only time you really press into him is because you want something out of him. Press into Jesus because you love him and you want to get to know him more. You just want to know him more. You love him. You want to get to know him. You want to spend time with him. You want to spend time in his presence. Your faith, the only way you're going to build your faith is through prayer and the reading of the Word. That there are no other shortcuts. There's no other way. It is that simple. We complicate things, but it is that simple. Your faith, if you want strong faith, if you want to be a person of faith, if you want to have greater faith, you can't will it. You just simply have to spend time with Him in His presence through prayer and His Word. That is how your faith will build. It is only by prayer and reading of the Word that your faith will ever build. You cannot will your faith to happen. You cannot make yourself believe. You cannot just work it up inside of you that you're just going to believe Him for your healing, or you're going to believe Him to save your lost loved one, or you're going to believe Him and trust Him through a hard time. You can't will that kind of stuff. It only happens through seeking His face, from standing out from the crowd, from being different, from going to Jesus and touching Jesus. You have to stand out from the crowd in that sense. And I'm about to open these altars in a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you the opportunity in a couple of minutes. No one come yet, please. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to step out and come talk to Jesus about whatever the Spirit has dealt with you personally about this morning. And if you need salvation, you may come. If you're not saved, you've never really officially made Him Lord of your life, you may come. If you've backslidden, you can, and you want to come back to Him this morning. You've drifted away from Him. You're doing things you know you shouldn't be doing. You can come. You can make those things right. If you would say, I'm in the crowd, but I know my faith does not stand out. I'm pretty much like the rest of the crowd. I'm not standing out. I know I'm not seeking God like I should be seeking God. It's not necessarily that I'm in sin. I'm living a godly life. I'm living according to His Word. But I know that I do not seek Him like I should be seeking Him. I don't want to get too close to Him. I just want to be part of the crowd. I do want to be around Him, but I don't want to get too close. When Jesus asked, who touched me? I know that you may be saying, when Jesus asked who touched me, I would have been one of them in the crowd denying it, even though I was bumping all into Him. You may be somebody that's saying, I've wanted to be around you, Jesus, but I haven't wanted to be intimate with you. I haven't really wanted you to notice me, so to say. That's what seeking God is. It is being intimate with Him in relationship. It's being intimate with Him in relationship, being close to Him. Don't let me narrow down this altar call. By no means. If there is something in this message that the Holy Spirit spoke to you about that I haven't made a direct call for, but He has spoke to you, there's this thing on your heart that you know that you just need to talk to Jesus about, whether it's a need that you need met or just something you need to make right with Him. You may come and talk to Jesus, and if you need a touch in your body, whatever you want, whatever you need to talk to God about, you may come now and talk to Him this morning at these altars.